Welcome back to Digital Convergence. In our previous episodes, we've explored how AI algorithms can homogenize culture through recommendation systems, how global distribution networks amplify this effect by spreading increasingly uniform cultural products worldwide, and how these forces create a self-reinforcing cycle that accelerates cultural homogenization. Today, we're examining how cultural homogenization potentially limits our collective problem-solving abilities and innovation capacity. When diverse cultural perspectives diminish, we risk losing unique approaches to problem-solving that have evolved over centuries in different contexts, potentially narrowing the range of solutions available for addressing complex challenges. Cultural diversity isn't just valuable for its own sake. It represents humanity's collective wisdom developed across countless generations and contexts. Different cultural traditions encode unique knowledge and problem-solving methods that offer alternative approaches to common challenges. As Stanford researchers Zhao Ji and Chunchen Su note in their 2024 research, cultural perspectives significantly influence what people want and expect from technological solutions, suggesting that diverse cultural inputs are essential for developing truly comprehensive approaches to complex problems. Today, we'll explore how the homogenization of cultural expression potentially narrows our collective problem-solving toolkit at precisely the moment when global challenges demand the widest possible range of innovative solutions. Cultural diversity functions as an engine for innovation by providing multiple perspectives and approaches to problems. Research consistently shows that diverse groups outperform homogeneous groups in complex problem-solving tasks, particularly when facing novel challenges that require creative thinking. This advantage stems from what cognitive scientists call cognitive diversity, the presence of different mental models and problem-solving approaches that allow groups to explore a wider solution space than would be possible with uniform thinking patterns. In cultural terms, this diversity represents thousands of years of human adaptation to different environments, social structures, and challenges, creating a rich repository of knowledge and approaches that can be applied to contemporary problems. This innovation advantage isn't just theoretical. A 2029 analysis referenced in our research materials found a 34% decrease in approach diversity for patent applications addressing similar problems compared to 15 years earlier. This suggests that as cultural expressions become more homogenized, technological innovation itself may be narrowing, what researchers call solution space contraction. The decreasing diversity of approaches in patent applications provides a measurable indicator of how cultural homogenization potentially limits our collective problem-solving capacity. When innovators worldwide draw from increasingly similar cultural references and thinking patterns, the range of solutions they consider may become correspondingly narrow, regardless of their individual creativity or intelligence. Different cultural traditions encode unique knowledge and problem-solving methods developed through centuries of adaptation to local conditions. These approaches represent what anthropologists call cultural knowledge diversity, the range of approaches, perspectives, and solutions encoded in distinct cultural traditions. The Cultural Heritage Institute estimates that the accelerating homogenization of global cultural expression potentially represents the largest loss of intangible cultural heritage since the colonial era. This loss isn't just about traditions or art forms, but about diverse ways of understanding and solving problems that could be valuable for addressing contemporary challenges. As cultural expressions homogenize, these alternative problem-solving frameworks become increasingly marginalized or lost entirely. When algorithmic systems worldwide prioritize similar content and approaches, they create what researchers call algorithmic convergence, the tendency for AI-guided research and innovation to cluster around extensions of current knowledge, rather than exploring truly novel approaches. This convergence occurs because AI systems learn from existing data, inherently favoring patterns that have been successful in the past rather than truly revolutionary approaches. A concerning trend identified in our research materials shows that scientists are spending less time on idea generation and more time evaluating AI-generated candidates. While this increases short-term productivity, it potentially narrows the range of approaches considered, particularly those that might draw from non-dominant cultural traditions or knowledge systems that have been underrepresented in AI training data. This convergence is particularly evident in how global standardization increasingly replaces locally adapted solutions across fields ranging from architecture to agriculture to public health. When the same AI tools trained on similar datasets are used worldwide, they naturally favor approaches that have worked in dominant contexts rather than solutions adapted to local conditions. Cultural homogenization accelerates this process by making local knowledge and approaches increasingly invisible or inaccessible to both AI systems and human decision-makers. The result is what innovation researchers call epistemological narrowing, the gradual reduction in the diversity of knowledge frameworks considered valid or valuable for addressing problems, regardless of their potential utility in specific contexts. This limitation becomes particularly problematic for what complexity scientists call wicked problems. Challenges like climate change, social inequality, or public health crises that are highly complex, context-dependent, and resistant to standardized solutions. These problems specifically require diverse solution approaches because no single framework adequately captures their complexity. Cultural diversity provides exactly this diversity of frameworks, offering alternative perspectives that might identify solution paths invisible within dominant approaches. As cultural homogenization narrows the range of perspectives engaged with these problems, we potentially lose access to valuable alternative approaches at precisely the moment when such diversity is most needed for addressing our most pressing global challenges. By 2031, architectural firms worldwide use the same AI design tools, trained on the same datasets. The result? Buildings in Jakarta look remarkably similar to those in Madrid, despite vastly different climates, cultural needs, and local materials. Traditional architectural wisdom developed over centuries to address local conditions is gradually lost as global standardization takes precedence over local adaptation. What makes this trend particularly concerning isn't just aesthetic homogenization, but the loss of climate-appropriate design approaches that evolved over generations to create comfortable, energy-efficient buildings suited to specific environments. When buildings worldwide adopt similar designs regardless of context, they often require enormous energy inputs to maintain comfort, contributing to both resource depletion and climate change. The architectural homogenization process operates through what design researchers call reference narrowing, the tendency for AI tools to draw from increasingly similar reference materials, regardless of the context. Analysis of architectural AI tools reveals that training datasets predominantly feature certain styles and approaches that become subtly normalized in AI-assisted designs worldwide. A comparative study referenced in our materials found that regional architectural traditions showed significantly less structural variation over a 5-year period, despite continued differences in surface aesthetics. This suggests that while buildings might maintain some visual markers of cultural identity, their fundamental approaches to space, structure, and environmental adaptation are increasingly homogenized. What makes this example particularly revealing is how quickly technological systems are reshaping architectural traditions that took centuries to develop. Traditional architectural approaches represent collective wisdom about living harmoniously in specific environments, knowledge about natural ventilation in tropical climates, thermal mass in desert regions, or moisture management in rainy areas. As architectural practice homogenizes around globally standardized approaches, this localized knowledge becomes increasingly marginalized or forgotten entirely. The loss isn't just cultural but practical, as standardized buildings often require significantly more energy and resources to maintain comfort compared to locally adapted traditional designs, creating both environmental and economic costs that might have been avoided through greater diversity of architectural approaches. In 2032, researchers at a climate institute rely on the same AI research tools used worldwide. When addressing a unique local environmental challenge involving soil erosion in an arid mountain region, they find the AI consistently steers them toward standard solutions that have worked elsewhere: concrete retaining walls, chemical soil stabilizers, and engineered drainage systems, but aren't appropriate for their specific context with its unique combination of soil composition, indigenous plant species, and seasonal weather patterns. Despite the team's expertise, they find themselves unconsciously influenced by the AI's recommendations, which subtly normalize certain approaches while making alternative approaches seem less credible or effective. What makes this scenario particularly challenging is that the AI's recommendations aren't obviously wrong. They represent approaches that have worked in other contexts and are backed by substantial data. The problem is that they fail to incorporate valuable local knowledge about traditional erosion control methods developed by indigenous communities over centuries in this specific region. These methods, involving strategic placement of native plants, seasonal water harvesting techniques, and locally sourced materials, don't appear in the AI's recommendations because they're underrepresented in its training data despite their proven effectiveness in this particular environment. This illustrates how algorithmic systems can systematically disadvantage contextual knowledge regardless of its actual utility for specific problems. The researchers eventually realize the issue when they consult with local community elders who describe erosion control methods used successfully in the region for generations. By combining these traditional approaches with modern monitoring technology, they develop a solution significantly more effective and sustainable than the AI's standardized recommendations. This hybrid solution required exactly the kind of cultural knowledge diversity that algorithmic homogenization threatens: the ability to recognize the value of alternative knowledge frameworks and integrate them with contemporary approaches. The scenario illustrates how preserving diverse cultural knowledge isn't just about heritage preservation, but about maintaining access to alternative solution approaches that may prove invaluable for addressing context-specific challenges in ways that standardized global approaches cannot. Homogenized thinking creates vulnerability through identical response patterns across communities and institutions. When diverse groups adopt increasingly similar approaches to problems, they become susceptible to what systems theorists call common mode failure: the tendency for similar systems to fail in similar ways when facing novel challenges. Cultural diversity historically provided redundancy through different communities developing distinct approaches to similar challenges, creating a form of collective insurance against catastrophic failure. As cultural homogenization leads to increasingly similar thinking patterns worldwide, this protective diversity diminishes, potentially making our collective response to novel challenges more brittle and less adaptable despite appearing more efficient in stable conditions. Complex challenges like climate change particularly require diverse solution approaches because they manifest differently across contexts and resist standardized solutions. What works to address flooding in the Netherlands may be inappropriate for Bangladesh despite addressing superficially similar problems. Cultural diversity provides what adaptability researchers call response diversity, the range of potential actions available within a system facing change or disruption. Research in ecological resilience consistently shows that systems with greater response diversity better withstand shocks and adapt to changing conditions than more homogeneous systems, regardless of their efficiency under stable conditions. This principle applies equally to societal resilience, where cultural diversity enables different communities to develop context-appropriate responses to shared challenges. Cultural diversity also provides redundancy and alternative models during crises, creating what resilience theorists call functional redundancy: multiple ways of fulfilling similar needs that provide backup systems when primary approaches fail. Throughout human history, communities have developed distinctive approaches to fundamental challenges like food security, shelter, social organization, and knowledge transmission. These diverse approaches represent alternatives that can be drawn upon when dominant systems face disruption. As cultural homogenization narrows this diversity of approaches, we potentially lose valuable alternatives that might prove crucial during systemic crises. This represents an often overlooked cost of cultural homogenization, the gradual depletion of alternative models that could provide guidance during times when conventional approaches prove inadequate. Cultural knowledge diversity provides what philosophers call epistemic humility, the recognition that no single knowledge system captures all valuable perspectives on complex reality. Different cultural traditions have developed unique epistemologies, ways of knowing, validating, and transmitting knowledge that offer distinctive lenses on shared reality. When these diverse knowledge systems interact, they can identify blind spots in each other's approaches and generate more comprehensive understanding than any single system alone. Cultural homogenization threatens this productive multiplicity by subtly normalizing certain epistemological approaches while marginalizing others, potentially reducing our collective capacity to recognize the limitations of dominant knowledge frameworks. This epistemic diversity becomes particularly valuable for what complexity theorists call unknown unknowns, aspects of problems that dominant frameworks fail to even recognize as relevant. Throughout history, different cultural traditions have attended to different aspects of human experience and the natural world, creating distinctive knowledge bases that sometimes recognize connections or phenomena overlooked by other traditions. For example, traditional ecological knowledge often incorporates multi-generational observations and holistic relationships that Western scientific approaches may miss despite their strengths in other areas. As cultural homogenization increasingly privileges certain knowledge systems over others, we risk losing alternative perspectives that might identify crucial factors or approaches invisible within dominant frameworks. The wisdom diversity challenge extends beyond specific knowledge to include what anthropologists call cultural metacognition, the distinctive ways different traditions think about thinking itself. Cultural traditions vary not just in what they know, but in how they structure knowledge, determine relevance, evaluate evidence, and integrate information across domains. These differences in cognitive approach represent valuable diversity in human sense-making that can be particularly valuable when facing novel or complex challenges that resist conventional analysis. As algorithmic systems increasingly normalize certain thinking patterns worldwide, this diversity of cognitive approaches potentially diminishes, narrowing the range of mental tools available for addressing our most difficult problems despite advances in specific knowledge domains. Research increasingly suggests that truly breakthrough innovations often emerge from the intersection of diverse knowledge domains and perspectives rather than from deeper exploration within established frameworks. This pattern, which innovation researchers call recombinant innovation, depends on bringing together previously unconnected ideas, approaches, or traditions to create something genuinely novel. Cultural diversity historically facilitated this process by maintaining distinct knowledge traditions that could periodically cross-pollinate, generating innovations that would be unlikely within any single tradition. As cultural homogenization reduces the distinctiveness of different knowledge traditions, the potential for such productive recombination may diminish despite increasing global connectivity. This innovation challenge is particularly evident in what researchers call the standardization paradox, the tendency for increasing efficiency through standardization to eventually undermine innovation by reducing diversity and experimentation. Algorithmic convergence accelerates this process by subtly normalizing certain approaches while making alternatives increasingly invisible or implausible. The research from our materials showing a 34% decrease in approach diversity for patent applications addressing similar problems provides concrete evidence of this narrowing effect. What makes this particularly concerning is that it potentially happens below the level of conscious awareness, with innovators worldwide gradually converging on similar approaches without recognizing the systemic narrowing of the solution space they're exploring. These innovation implications extend to what organizational theorists call adaptive capacity, the ability to recognize emerging challenges and develop novel responses when existing approaches prove inadequate. Cultural diversity historically supported this capacity by maintaining alternative perspectives that could identify emerging issues and propose unconventional solutions when dominant approaches faltered. Research in organizational resilience consistently shows that diverse teams better identify emerging risks and generate more innovative responses to crises than homogeneous teams, regardless of individual expertise. As cultural homogenization potentially reduces the diversity of perspectives engaged in innovation processes, our collective adaptive capacity may diminish despite increasing technological sophistication. One challenge in addressing cultural homogenization's effects on innovation is the difficulty of measuring what economists call innovation counterfactuals. Innovations that might have emerged under different conditions but didn't materialize under current systems. Unlike the innovations that do emerge, which can be counted and measured, the paths not taken remain invisible in conventional metrics. This creates what policy researchers call a measurement blind spot that may systematically undervalue cultural diversity's contribution to innovation by failing to account for the alternative approaches and solutions that homogenization prevents from emerging. This measurement challenge makes addressing cultural homogenization particularly difficult, as its costs remain largely invisible in conventional economic and innovation metrics. This measurement challenge connects to what cultural economists call the diversity premium paradox, the tendency for the value of cultural diversity to be highest precisely when it's least measurable through conventional metrics. The most valuable aspects of cultural diversity for innovation often involve maintaining alternative perspectives that may seem irrelevant or inefficient under current conditions, but prove invaluable when circumstances change. These option values of cultural diversity remain difficult to quantify in economic terms despite their potential importance for long-term innovation capacity. This creates systematic underinvestment in maintaining cultural diversity from a strictly market perspective, despite its potential long-term value for innovation and problem-solving. This measurement challenge suggests the need for what policy researchers call innovation portfolio diversity, approaches that deliberately maintain diverse cultural perspectives and knowledge traditions regardless of immediate measurable benefits. Much like biodiversity conservation recognizes the value of maintaining diverse species, even without immediate utility, cultural diversity preservation maintains knowledge and approaches that may prove valuable in unpredictable future contexts. Research in innovation systems suggests that maintaining such diversity often requires deliberate policy interventions to counterbalance the homogenizing pressures of market forces and algorithmic systems, which naturally favor immediate measurable benefits over long-term option values. This perspective recognizes cultural diversity as a form of collective knowledge insurance, whose value may only become fully apparent during periods of significant change or disruption. Understanding how cultural homogenization potentially limits innovation and problem-solving capacity helps us recognize what's at stake in the accelerating cycle of algorithmic and economic forces we've explored throughout this series. The challenge isn't simply preserving cultural traditions for their own sake, but maintaining the diverse knowledge systems, cognitive approaches, and problem-solving methods that different cultural traditions have developed over generations. These diverse approaches represent humanity's collective wisdom about navigating complex reality, wisdom that may prove increasingly valuable as we face unprecedented global challenges requiring novel solutions. By recognizing the potential innovation costs of cultural homogenization, we can begin to develop more thoughtful approaches to technological development and economic systems that support rather than undermine cultural diversity. What makes addressing these challenges particularly difficult is that cultural homogenization often advances through seemingly beneficial optimization processes rather than deliberate suppression. Each individual decision to adopt more efficient standardized approaches or algorithmically optimized processes may make perfect sense when considered in isolation. The challenge emerges from their cumulative effect on cultural diversity and the long-term innovation consequences that remain largely invisible in immediate metrics. This represents what systems theorists call an emergent property, an outcome that arises from system interactions rather than individual intentions. Addressing such challenges requires thinking at the system level rather than focusing solely on individual decisions. Considering how technological and economic systems might be designed to support rather than undermine the cultural diversity that fuels innovation. As we've explored today, cultural diversity provides more than aesthetic or heritage value. It represents a crucial resource for innovation and problem-solving that may prove increasingly valuable in an era of complex global challenges. By maintaining diverse knowledge traditions, cognitive approaches, and problem-solving methods, cultural diversity provides alternative perspectives that can identify blind spots in dominant approaches and generate novel solutions when conventional thinking proves inadequate. Understanding these connections between cultural diversity and innovation capacity helps us recognize what's at stake in the homogenizing processes we're exploring in this series, and consider how we might develop technological and economic systems that support rather than undermine the cultural diversity that ultimately enriches our collective problem-solving toolkit. What unique problem-solving approaches exist in your cultural background that might offer alternative solutions to contemporary challenges? Consider how your family, community, or cultural tradition approaches problems differently than mainstream methods. What assumptions or priorities shape these approaches, and how might they complement or challenge dominant problem-solving frameworks? Spend some time this week observing how the algorithms and platforms you use subtly normalize certain approaches to problems, while making alternatives seem less credible or relevant. Notice which cultural perspectives receive algorithmic amplification and which remain invisible in your information environment despite their potential value for addressing complex challenges. Join us next time as we examine a fascinating paradox: how AI systems depend on the very cultural diversity and creativity they potentially undermine. We'll explore how AI learns from existing human cultural outputs and how cultural homogenization potentially creates a negative feedback loop that limits AI's future capabilities. We'll investigate how each generation of AI learns from increasingly homogenized cultural content, potentially resulting in increasingly derivative outputs over time.